Well, good morning, everybody. First of all, sorry I'm a little bit later than I normally am. Came down this morning to record, and my basement was flooded. So at some point while I was traveling down through all the southeast where I thought I took all the wet weather with me, as you can see on this map, some of the rain around here plus some saturated soils just kind of soaked my basement. So I had to get things kind of cleaned up a little bit and get the sump pump running again. And I just blew the breaker. I'm not quite sure what was going on there while I was gone. But anyway, that's a little bit of my delay. Also, got in around 2 o'clock in the morning last night, but I had a lot of time to think while driving home. And I want to share with you what I've been thinking about. It has a lot to do with what you see here. As of late, you know the story, right? We have had, for the most part, strong flow coming around the Bermuda High. We've really soaked huge sections of the south and southeast. There have been a lot of hit or miss storms that have rolled through the central part of the country. We've had better rains getting into parts of the northeast. The southwest ridge has kind of fired up many storms across, the entirety of the southwest Great Basin into parts of the Pacific Northwest. But we've seen a lot of wildfires in the western United States and western Canada as well. So what I spent a lot of time thinking about is how is August going to shape up and what's going to be the dominant driver of that. And as I was kind of just rolling through parts of Tennessee and then Kentucky and then Indiana last night and finally getting into Illinois, I just really wanted to understand if this map is going to look different by the time we get to the end of August. Now, there'll be changes, but where will the changes be and where will we see those changes in the near term? So here's what we're going to cover today. I want to get into first some of the longer range outlook. We're going to just think through some of the bigger picture things now. And then I want to get into the near-term severe storm threat, the heat that's expanding into the central United States. I want to talk about where we think this pattern is going to be going. And I think it's going to hinge a lot on kind of a new region I haven't focused too much on lately that we've been watching a trend in all week, and that's going to be part of the Eastern Canadian Maritime. So all that's coming, but this is your newest drought monitor released yesterday morning, and one of the things I want to point out about the drought monitor is the change. With all of this rain that you've seen in this area, some of this, of course, was early enough to get captured when the new drought monitor was made on Tuesday. We can now see this shade of color, which is one class improvement in parts of the southeast, the Carolinas, Virginia. And this has been an area that we've been watching over the last 6 or 7 weeks develop drought. So that's quite important to get some rains back into those areas at this point in the season, knowing that the hurricane season is still ahead of us and can easily wipe out drought with one system. We're going to talk more about those hurricanes in just a few minutes. What I found myself thinking a lot about while everyone was asleep in my car was this. This is an animation over the last 90 days looking at ocean temperatures. And I've made a case for a pattern I thought would evolve, and it has a lot to do with these kind of epicenters of warm ocean temperatures in the North Pacific and North Atlantic. One that's been forming here, another one that is north and east of Hawaii, so right in through here, and the very, very warm kind of region off the Canadian Maritimes, but here in the North Atlantic. We've been discussing the tropics, though, right? The very conducive environment to the tropical season, which is still largely ahead of us. Right in through here, we've looked at the Atlantic meridional mode and the stronger trade winds that have at times allowed for some upwelling here. And then finally, the La Niña. And I've just been asking when kind of we're going to get La Niña to engage, because technically we're still very much in ENSO neutral conditions. So I'm thinking a lot about this because normally we watch La Niñas or El Niños, doesn't matter where you are, but we watch them build from midsummer all the way to Christmas. And I think it's kind of fun to share this with you. We tried to stop while we did this trip into the southeast at every Buc-ee's that was along the road. We discovered Buc-ee's a year ago. I know for somebody in the south, like just a year, yes, that's all. But it's an amazing place to stop if you've never stopped at one. We stopped at several, every one we could, and we actually ran into Santa Claus twice. And I reminded him yesterday that Christmas, as of yesterday, was only 5 months away. But if you're curious what my family looks like, this is my wife, Elena. This is my daughter, Amelia. She just turned 15. My son, Graham. If you'd like to know what I look like when I was 11, almost 12, that's exactly what I look like. This, of course, is Santa, and there I am over there on the left. This was late last night in Kentucky. So anyways, just thinking about this, I want to know what these ocean temperatures are really going to be doing. And are we going to get any sort of late summer, fall La Niña influence? Because that'll change how things go in August and September and October. And so I just want to dig into that question now and think more about it over the weekend, especially over the weekend, because on Monday, I'm going to give a talk to a group of Brazilian growers in Northern Illinois. They're up here on a trip. I'm going to go spend a lot of time with them, and I'm going to pick their brains and ask some questions I'll report to you next week. But what we're looking at now is the kind of equatorial temperature anomaly as a function of depth. So this is the equator here. This would be South America. This would be kind of the Indonesian, Australia side. And if we're looking to see how strong of a La Nina we can get, some of the early signals might come from these ocean temperature anomalies that are below the surface, 100, 150 meters, right in through here. We want to see if this is going to upwell. And to get this to upwell and get all the way to the surface, you've got to have strong trade winds. So the narrative is always about the trade wind behavior, I think, being the more dominant factor that a meteorologist has to discuss when it comes to La Nina. I mean, that's what La Ninas are to us. It's the trade winds that are faster than normal across the Pacific, right along the equator, and how it robs momentum from other parts of the atmosphere, like the westerly wind belts, both in the northern and southern hemisphere, which we're going to talk more about the southern hemisphere effect of this next week. So I want to bring you up to speed on a few things with this. I'm going to take you to BOM's page first. This is their Pacific Ocean forecast. And right out there in the middle of the equatorial Pacific, kind of this Niña region 3.4, right in through here, their BOM's forecast is for ENSO neutral all the way through winter. And their forecast is very similar to the Europeans. So we have the Australians, the Canadians, the Europeans, the Japanese, the French, the United States, and the British. And August to September, into October, November, and December, when we would expect La Nina event to kind of reach a peak. It's really NOAA that leads the way. And we talked about this yesterday, that this forecast given by NOAA is driven by their forecasters. These are people that have analyzed the data. They have deep institutional knowledge. They understand how it works, and they're going after it very aggressively. Modeling is what we're talking about here from the ECMWF, for example, and that is much, much less aggressive. And we're concerned that the model that was run, the ECMWF forecasting model, was run at the beginning of July. Okay, we'll get a new run in early August, but when it was run, La Nina stalled completely. And we wonder if that biased the outlook. Are we going to get into some weak La Nina conditions? That's the big question. So there's other ways by which we could look at this, and I'm just going to show you one of those. It's the Southern Oscillation Index. Now, long story short, if the Southern Oscillation Index goes very positive, the pressure pattern between Tahiti and Darwin, which is where this is measured, that's the index, the points over the index is measured. It's a pressure index, okay? That would mean that the trade winds, if it's very positive, are strong. They're moving fast. This is in the kind of the West Pacific along the equator. They're really cranked. And last time we saw that was way back here in 2022, which was the end of our kind of triple dip La Nina. And then here was the El Nino event we've seen since then. Well, we're still bouncing around in here. So we've not yet fully engaged into La Nina-like behavior. And what I wait on, what I'm watching for, is a couple of things. Some of that's going to be this low-level wind. So 925 millibars, this is basically just off the surface. These are low-level wind anomalies. And I'm waiting to see a lot of fast winds with these vectors pointing from the east to the west. Now, lately, the trade winds have kind of picked up. In fact, if you take a look at the zonal component of it, blue would represent stronger easterly wind bursts. And we've seen a few of them at times. But when La Nina's influence is most dominant is when these easterly wind bursts steal momentum from the westerlies, both in the northern and southern hemisphere, and change the wind shear pattern over parts of the Atlantic, which we talked about this week. So if you just ask, Eric, is La Nina flex? Is it in control right now? And my answer is not yet, but I think it will be quite soon. So what are we dealing with? Well, as we go into the month of August, I've made a case that these three large epicenters of high pressure, 1, 2, and 3, are shifting. And I made that case all week long. And some new evidence at the end of this week suggests that going into August, we may land back into this pattern rather than seeing this ridge shift over here, this ridge shift here, the Bermuda high build a little bit in this direction, leaving a vacancy for ridging that could live right there. Now, I've made that case a lot, right? We looked at ocean temperatures, and I said ridge 1 will live here, ridge 2 will live there, Bermuda high will live a little bit displaced to the north, and I put an X right here on repeat every day this past week, was saying that is where I think the ridge could open and stay. But persistence sometimes wins a forecast. And despite me thinking all week long that it was there, I just need to call into question if that was a good message or not. Because what I'm seeing is that this month of July has favored the ridges being in these three locations. And you know what that's done? It's driven all the heat in the west, the wildfires in the west. Overall, the Midwest has been cooler. The Midwest has been wet and stormy. We had a tropical system in early July sneak in here. That was Beryl. We've seen, the shifting Bermuda high soak the southeast. I got to ask if we're going to just see more of that. That's the big question I'm going after here. So these ocean temperatures are key to figuring that out. I just want to let you know that I don't think La Niña is the dominant factor. Because if La Niña was really going to begin to influence the pattern, it would do something like this in August. So I correlated August geopotential height, so that's the trough ridge pattern, to the multivariate ENSO index. Sorry, I got to get my words out here this morning. And what you find is this. If La Niña were on, we would see a lot of ridging in this area. Troughing here, which we have seen, but this would really send the jet quickly into the northwest and bump it out here over the eastern half of North America. And I'm not seeing that. I mean, just take a look at the newest European long range. This is the month of August. We see some higher than normal pressure. We talked about that. Some higher than normal pressure there. And the Bermuda high is stronger on its northern side. But I made this case, like, why isn't the model producing higher pressure in the midsection of the country? We looked at this yesterday. I said, well, it is trying to produce a ridge, but every new model run tries to push this back toward the Great Basin or the Continental Divide or somewhere in the west, rather than anchoring it in the southern plains, which is what I've been very concerned about. Because certainly in the next 10 days, we're going to put a big ridge here. But that only gets us to the very beginning of August. Do we see a retreat backward, in the high pattern back to a western U.S. ridge, which opens up storm clusters in this area, which opens up the Bermuda high to send storms in to the Gulf of Mexico and the East Coast? That all seems to be a part of where this might go, and we're not falling in line with the typical La Niña-like fall. So you say, well, what is not fall, but a La Niña-like late summer? You say, well, what would it be if it was, normal La Niña-like late summer? Well, in August, on this precipitation correlation map, if we had a La Niña, a full-blown La Niña coming in, everywhere that you see the red colors or the warm colors, we would be getting very dry. In the blue, we'd be getting wet, okay? Because when there's an El Niño, it tends to be wet in through here and drier there. So we just flip that. And in terms of temperatures, let's go here. This would be what the August temperature would look like if you just said La Niña was the most dominant factor. These blues would be warmer than normal because it's an inverse relationship. We'd be cool in the northwest. And you see why that would happen? I mean, you'd have a big ridge sitting here, keeping things really warm, and the jet stream would come screaming into the northwest, keeping it cool. But I just don't see that taking shape. It doesn't seem to be in the works. And some of the models are continuing to hint at that. So where's the ridge likely going to be? Well, the models want to anchor it here and keep it higher than normal across the northern edge of this. And what they're doing with that in terms of precip is they're trying to keep drier weather in the plains, but I think the model's missing this. Because if we ridge out here, given how much moisture is available plus the open Gulf of Mexico, I think we keep a corridor in through here very stormy, not showing up as dry as maybe the model is hinting at. Now, will there be dry times? And yeah, we're going to see really dry conditions here from the Rocky Mountains into this region in the near-term forecast over the next 10 plus days. But I think longer term, if that ridge retrogrades back to the west, I think that seems to make a bit more sense to me now that I've watched this and had a good long think about it as I came home last night. So does that echo anything? Let's shrink this up. There we go. The CPC may have had a handle on this early. This was their August forecast. They anchored most of the heat on the Continental Divide. They put it in the Great Basin. That's where they have the dryness. And this would lead to storms evolving through this corridor. Bermuda high pumping in moisture. The risk of increased wildfires in through here. How much storm does Montana get? That's going to be tricky. How do the storms roll around this into parts of Oregon, Idaho, parts of Washington, coming out of California? That's also going to be tricky. And where does the monsoon kind of survive down here in Arizona and New Mexico? All of those questions, I don't think I could give you a crystal clear answer on right now, but I'm starting to get a little more, acquainted with what I think the Climate Prediction Center was thinking about in this pattern. So I just wanted to kind of bring all of that to your attention. And then I'm going to show it to you this way. With the newest artificial intelligence forecast, which was released this morning, I went out and made another one of those graphs that says over the next 15 days, what does the trough ridge pattern look like? And this was the surprising thing. I know that a ridge is opening into the midsection of the country soon, but when you look at the whole next 15 days, the models are trying to anchor higher than normal heights here, here, and there. And if that looks familiar, I got to go find that slide. Where did I put it? Right here. Let's shrink this up. Those are the same places, 1, 2, and 3, that we've been having them. And if I come back to it, where did I put that guy? Here, there we go. The fact that we're getting lower heights here, a ridge over Central Europe, northwest flow coming into parts of Ukraine and Russia with a trough there, I think that this wave pattern is going back to something we've seen already a lot, which means the heat that's coming into the central United States right now, and it's going to get very, very hot, it may not last more than 7 or 8, 9 days. And we start to see the heat retreating back into the west, and the risk of more wildfires in the west and more excessive heat in the west seems to go back up in the month of August. So that's a lot of change over what I made an argument for most of this week, but we have to just follow these changes together, and that's why I present it to you this way. So let's kind of dig into this pattern real quick. Here's what I'm watching in the near term. This weekend, there's a trough that's going right across this part of the Canadian Prairie up toward the Hudson Bay. There's another trough that sneaks in right in through here that's going to be dropping in some precip coming up from the south in this location. But I mentioned that this is the one we got to keep an eye on, because as we go through the weekend into early next week, we're going to see, look at this, on the 30th, the 31st, and getting into August 1st. That's right there. So see this broader trough that's over the western U.S. by the time we get through the weekend? This is going to be important for seeing weekend storms in the upper Midwest, northern plains, parts of the Canadian Prairie. And then next week, this is on the 31st. See this ridge? Watch this trough right here. That trough is going to roll right over the top of the ridge, coming out of Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, into the Dakotas. It doesn't look like much, does it? And then sneak right here into Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin. And this is why midweek to late week next week, I want to watch this corridor for the risk of strong to severe storms coming in this direction. Now, this is just the time of year where these storms tend to be more linear in fashion. So I want to be aware that this could set us up for having some strong winds and possibly some damaging winds out of this setup if it does manifest itself. It's still more than, it's 6 to 7 days out. It's next Thursday we're watching for this. But after that, this is where the big ridge is going to live. And by Friday, August 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, look at what it did. It came right back to the Four Corners states in the Great Basin. And more than likely, you will get storms that cascade over the top of this, fed on Bermuda high moisture coming through the Gulf of Mexico. Now, on August 3rd, 4th, and 5th, there is something that's been showing up in the models. Two things that I think we really need to discuss. The models continue to deepen this trough after the first 5 or 6 days of August. And to the south, there seems to be something going on right here with a low. And that may be tropical in origin. And the last several model runs have attempted to produce this. So, for example, this is the 0Z run. If I take you back to the 18Z, if I can get that to load, it was there. See it? With the broader trough over the eastern Canadian Maritimes. What about the previous run, the 12Z? Still there. See that little wiggle? That's what I'm talking about with the broader trough here. So what I'm questioning is, with the presence of some sort of tropical feature coming through and the reinforcement of a deeper trough that keeps showing up in the Canadian Maritimes, this is kind of just displacing a little bit of the conversation we had earlier this week about where this pattern's going to go. Okay. One other thing, is this also showing up in other modeling systems? This is the European model. I got to go back to the 0Z run because the 12Z or 6Z was coming in at that time. And take you out here again, August 5th, 6th, and 7th. Where did it put the ridge? Right here. There's broader troughing that's happening there. And the ensemble's not picking up on that feature that's out here, but the ensemble is picking up on something else. And over the next 10 days, we see that from now through August the 5th, the probabilities have been increasing around the base of the Bermuda High for something to form. Now, what is unknown is if it does form, where does it move? Does it go toward the Gulf? Does it come into the southeast? How strong is it going to be? Or does it do like the artificial intelligence suggests, which is this last arrow, which means it rolls up the East Coast? I think it's out there. Now, I want you to understand, this is way out there. It is not in the next 7 days. So NOAA's got this, right? The next 7 days, National Hurricane Center, no activity expected. But we've been discussing that around that Bermuda high, you see it? Big Bermuda high here, that the moisture, take a look at this, is so elegant. The moisture coming in like this, that's going to support those storm clusters I talked about next week, also some this weekend. And Bermuda high opening itself here. Watch this little wave. It's very subtle in the flow. But here it is. See it right here? This is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That's it. It's just this little guy right there. That's the little wave we're keeping an eye on. And the European model's taking it right in through here. This is the operational run and trying to send it over Florida. Now, that's way out there in the forecast, but every single day this week I've been showing you that something is expected to form off the bottom side or the southern side of that Bermuda high. Okay, so these are the things that I'm watching in the longer term. We have our own near-term issues we have to discuss as well. So let's set this aside and come back to the kind of things that are going on right now. So this morning, this is pretty late into the morning. I apologize again for how late I'm recording, but I'm going to take you back to yesterday. And several neat things on this this satellite image. I drove through some of this deep convection yesterday. Very heavy rainfall coming home. Some spotty storms in parts of Missouri. Broad cloud shield here. I'm going to have to watch this as we go forward in the forecast as moving toward the north. I'll show you that in a second. But as the sun was setting again, we've talked about it all week, the wildfire smoke, the western U.S. wildfires, including this large one here in parts of California. But the fires that were in Alberta, well, last night as the sun was setting, see the deep low that came through here we forecast this week? It's pulling that smoke out. Look at the smoke mixing with the cloud cover. And this dumped a bunch of rain in parts of Alberta. Look at this spin up just before the sun set. I map out the rainfall there using the Kappa data set. And on my new website, once it's finished, you'll have access to this as well. But some places in here, just in the last 3 days, picked up well north of 80 millimeters of rainfall. So again, just go in intervals of 25 if you're used to imperial units. So 25 millimeters is roughly an inch. So, 2 inches would be 50. So we're talking about well over 3 inches of rain out of this hitting some of those, areas that were burning. But in the northwestern United States and in Northern California last night, we just get another glimpse at how the wind was driving so much of the wildfire activity yesterday. And this fire here in Northern California spreading its smoke all the way across parts of Nevada, Oregon, Idaho, and getting into Montana as well. So this is becoming a pretty serious situation. And if my forecast, my kind of modified view of things is right, we pull heat back into the west in a big way once we get out there to August, like 7, 8, 9, 10. And that's going to be a major concern for the west as we kind of get later in the season. I did have to show you this one more thing. The storms that were in Texas last night, look at the outflow they produced. I love watching this. So these storms popped here. They sent their outflow back to the west, can you tell? And abandoned their updraft. So these storms were just that type that blow up in the afternoon and then they're gone by evening. And just a beautiful view from space as to what that outflow looks like in the kind of abandoned updrafts that are here on this side. Okay, where's it all going? Well, the wildfire smoke first. Here's a 48-hour forecast. We're still dealing with the winds blowing that smoke from the western U.S. right over Montana, the northern plains, getting into the upper Midwest. The lingering smoke here is from the Alberta wildfires, but as you can tell, some of those wildfires have been put out by the rain, and less smoke is being added to the mix because those fires have been put out by the heavy rains. But early this morning, this is our all hazards weather map. We have air quality issues throughout the west, heat advisories for the Red River Valley of the North. This is red flag warning here, but flood watches in New Mexico, coastal Texas, getting into this part of Louisiana, and then parts of the Carolinas. So last night's lows did not cool off much in the northern plains. Early this morning, just after sunrise, it was almost 80 degrees in parts of North and South Dakota. So I want to show you where this heat that's been in Montana is moving out. But take a look at how much cooler we got in the northwest as that deep low rolled through Alberta, cooling things off behind it. We'll talk more about temperatures in a second. This morning, let me get an update on this. Let's go ahead and pause it there. We are watching, there it is, heavy rains from eastern Texas into the Delta early this morning. And then this will be the front, curl up around the deeper low that is pulled out of Alberta into northern Saskatchewan that I got to keep an eye on later today. Because Storm Prediction Center, let's see if they've updated this now. Storm Prediction Center's got a few spotty areas for the risk of stronger storms today. Also back here in Nevada, Utah, southern Arizona. Tomorrow, that front lingers. So the Red River Valley of the North stretching into parts of South Dakota, western Nebraska, chances for storms. And by the way, everywhere that you see this shading, this is all there's a general risk of thunderstorms. And getting out there to the 28th, we'll have to keep an eye on this part of the western Corn Belt, upper Midwest, northern plains for the risk of some stronger storms as well. So let's see some model output on this. As we play through the remainder of today, right in through here, watch for those stronger storms to show up. Watch for the western and high plains for storms to come around the big Four Corners Ridge. And we continue to see wet weather in the southeast through parts of Tennessee getting over toward the Appalachian Mountains. I drove right through this last night, and it rained yesterday the whole time when I drove through here. And then keep an eye on this. So coming into parts of Arkansas there we go. Getting into Saturday midday, rain moving into Missouri out of the south. See that? That's still pumped up there by Bermuda high flow. There's that trough that's sneaking in there as well. The Bermuda high is pushing the trough north. And we see storms by the time we get into Sunday rolling into the central U.S. And the coverage is going to be tricky with this, but that's what our high-res models look at. Now, beyond that, this now gets into the bigger picture thing. So this is going on now, okay? What we've got here is the Bermuda high influence. So this is all this moisture in through here. And remember, we're watching next week, midweek next week, for a corridor to open right in through there for severe storms. But again, it's almost that same shape I drew the other day. If you're in this area, we're going to get extremely hot and dry. There will be storms that come up right up against the Rocky Mountains here in the Front Range. And the Pacific Northwest, given the cooler weather and the trough that's digging in, we've got wet conditions in parts of the Pacific Northwest. The NBM isn't showing quite the same magnitude of what I think is going to happen. I actually think the European models picked up on it best. But here's the NBM outlook for the next 7 days. This is the WPC outlook for the next 7 days. But this is the one I want to look at. The new European, look at this, has got this corridor better outlined for the risk of those strong to severe storms, while keeping the Gulf moisture open, meaning that much of this area is going to continue to see drought relief. It's also picking up on better, wetter conditions in parts of the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia. And see those front range storms I mentioned? That's pretty consistent in this model. What's missing is in this area. And how many scattered storms can we get while the heat pours into this region? Real quick, this is what the GFS is saying. So very similar outlook overall. So let's distill this down into a couple of important maps. Next 10 days, highest chance at staying dry. That's what you're looking at here. This is the probability of staying under 1/10 of an inch. And as that heat pours in, the isolated storms in this area, which I still think can pop, will be critical to delivering moisture while temperatures easily eclipse 100 degrees for several days in a row here. But that's our drier spot. On the wetter side of it, this is the 10-day outlook for the probability of over an inch. And we've been kind of discussing this pattern we're going into to start August. And this seems to continue to be pretty consistent. I would like to compare the models for you after I show you this, though. Over the next 14 days, in the past 14 days, we need to use this to put into context the next 14 days. Because notice these dry areas that continue to show up in parts of the central United States, in pockets of the Ohio River Valley, eastern Great Lakes, and then, of course, in the northwestern United States, getting into parts of Montana. You see, this is the map that we need to understand before we get in and look where the models are going to toss out their rainfall. So GFS left, European right. We've already seen through this weekend. There's Saturday getting into Sunday. There's that plume of moisture coming north out of eastern Texas and Louisiana. It's going to link up with a frontal boundary that's right in through here, giving us the risk on Sunday night for strong to severe storms in this region. But that's just the first of 2 episodes next week. So Sunday night into Monday, watch it here. Meanwhile, routine storms in the southeastern United States. We then get into early next week. Look at this. This is Tuesday morning Tuesday afternoon and evening, so a lot of scattered showers and storms east, but I'm watching this carefully right here, coming out of Idaho and Montana, stinking across, there it is, on Wednesday night. The first round of storms initiating from that last little rogue trough that comes through here, showing up in the European model, and then spreading throughout the day on Thursday into this part of the western Corn Belt toward the central Corn Belt and Mississippi Valley. And that's why I'm thinking midweek next week we need to keep an eye on this corridor overall, trying to understand how far into the south these storms make it. But that's out a week for you. If we take a look at what's happening beyond that, I want to show you something. I think we're going to have to watch the evolution of these three forecasts by the time we get into the model runs later today, because they're making it look very, very dry. Whereas the European model, the European artificial intelligence model, I think picked up on maybe a better view of what day 8 through 14 is going to look like. You're going, well, put all this together for me. Well, one, where's that tropical system going to go? Is it here or is it here? Not sure yet. Two, if the ridge retreats back in this direction, we get storms that cascade over the top of this. And the dryness that you see in this area will be pushed out. And we'll likely get storms that pull through this at times, getting out there into that August 3rd to August 9th time frame. I think the Bermuda High still pumps more storms into the southeast as well. But there's no denying that we're going to go through a stretch of days where things get very hot and quite dry. Take a look at this. That's Friday's high temperatures. Now you can see why they have the heat advisories here in the Red River Valley of the North. This is all cloud cover driven down here, why it's cooler. While the west cools off, you're going to see the central U.S. on Sunday. Triple-digit heat, very hot in the northeast, hot around the Great Lakes. Monday, another day of excessive heat here in the central U.S. You'll see the heat advisories, the heat watches and warnings coming out over the weekend. That's Tuesday into Wednesday. I mean, we got central Kansas at 108, according to the National Digital Forecast Database, by next Wednesday. And then this will be the time frame that you're going to watch running over this ridge, the risk of those storms coming through this area and possibly into this heat as well. Okay? So that's Wednesday into Thursday. Watch this area. Now, do you notice already by next Thursday, we've got heat back in the west again? In the day 5 through 10 outlook, while it keeps things very hot here, in day 5 through 10, it's starting to rebuild into the west. Now, we are expecting, just take a look at this, that first week of August, a lot of heat to be centered in this area. But the day 10 through 15 is trying to pull that heat back to the west and start to maybe bring things back toward normal in through this whole section of the Mississippi Valley, getting down into the southern part of the U.S. And we see that in the European as well. This is the next 5 days. That's day 5 through 10. Now watch, day 10 through 15. Can you see the backing off of the heat here and the return of it back into the western U.S., the western half of the U.S.? I think that's critical going forward. Okay, we've made a lot of just cases for new things in this forecast video. Where does it end? Well, we have to pay attention to stuff happening elsewhere around the world. And the typhoon we've been talking about continues to spread across parts of China, just like it's been forecast all week. That's the latest update on that. In terms of rainfall, very wet in through here, hitting like Shandong, Beijing, North China Plain, Manchurian Plain. Southeast Asia stays wet. France may be getting some storms in place as we start the Olympics later today. Spotty dryness throughout Ukraine and western Russia, but better chances of rain in pockets, especially to the north. We are expecting Africa to continue to toss out waves. How they form is what's critical. If I could just repeat again, watch this area very carefully over the next 10 to 15 days. And in terms of temperatures, it's going to be quite warm, I think, for the Paris Games compared to average. Cooler here where the trough is going to live, because remember how the pattern goes. That's what it's doing. And I think that's going to be important for what's going on in Europe. But across the United States, this is going to be shifting a lot when you look at the difference between week 1 and week 2. So we'll keep you up to date. I'll watch it all weekend, get some rest, get my thoughts back together, get this basement dried out, and we'll talk again on Monday. I appreciate it. Thanks.